Here's my 5th and final version of my Ford F-Series 7th generation models. I think this one might be my favorite too. So for this one I modeled a 4-wheel drive, single cab, short bed Ford F-100. I think the short bed looks nice. And this time I went for a lot of functions instead of all-out performance. But performance I think is still decent. So the basic functions, we've just got an opening hood, doors open, bench seat can fold a little, I guess, tailgate comes down, and then I can take off the roof, show you the interior. We've got a working steering wheel, working gear stick, then opening glove box. So for the suspension I have a pretty simple leaf-sprung live axle in the back. And then in the front I have Ford's unique twin traction beam design again. So if you look, well, I'll flip it up and show you. So for the twin traction beam we have 2 long arms. So there's the one that goes up from here to this wheel. So it's kind of like, it's only got the one pivot up there, no pivot down here. Then another one that runs up there for the second side. And so they have a pivot about, say, there and there. And then this one half shaft has the drive coming to it, to the differential here. So it comes straight out this side to the wheel. But then here we've got a CV joint in the middle to send it to the other wheel. So you can see it here. So it's kind of it was a compromise they had between a solid axle and a double wishbone independent design, and it's pretty interesting to model in Technic, I've found. It's the main reason I actually chose this truck to model over a Ford or over a Chevy or a Dodge. So I've got 2 hard shocks per side in the front to make it hard enough. They're in kind of random spots though because it's very asymmetrical overall. And you can see the rear here with the leaf springs. So if I flip it back up, you can see it in the front. It's pretty stiff in the front. Doesn't work as well as in the back, but I'm happy with it still. The final manual function I have, and probably the most interesting in my opinion, is the manual locking front hubs. So the theory of this, in real 4x4s, they've got the transfer case that allows you to shift between rear-wheel drive and 4-wheel drive. So if you're in rear-wheel drive, the front wheels are not being driven by the engine, which is good because if they were, you'd end up with problems because there's no central differential. But still, they're the efficiency problem because the front differentials and drive shaft and all that is still spinning because it's being driven from the wheels backwards. So they're not driven, but it's still spinning. So older 4x4s would have the manual disconnects in the center of the wheel. Usually you rotated a knob to disengage them. So then the wheel would just spin freely on the hub without spinning the drive shaft at all. So that made it a lot more efficient. If you're running in rear-wheel drive with the hubs unlocked, the front drive shaft and differential is not rotating at all, which is more efficient. Nowadays, I think sometimes they have like vacuum-operated hubs like that you don't have to work manually. Some use a center axle disconnect where it just kind of has a clutch in the one half shaft on the front, so it just sends all the power, like it doesn't get past the differential. It spins the spider gears inside the differential but doesn't go any further. Ford is the only company in North America to still have the manual hubs on their heavy-duty trucks, but they're kind of a semi-automatic. Like, you can have an automatic mode or then override that and lock them manually. But anyways, to show you what I did here, mine do not rotate. I think that's just impossible at this scale with Lego. But if you see my hub here, I've got a small turntable that the wheel rotates on. Then I've got a CV joint here that's used for the steering, but because this here it's smooth, I've got an axle right here that I can push in and out. So if it's in, it meshes with the CV joint and is driven. If it's out, it's free rolling. So with the truck hanging like this off the edge. You can see how that works. So if we pull out the axle, it'll just rotate freely. You can see the differential in there is not moving. And the CV joint over here is not moving either. But then if I push this in and rotate it, the spider gears in the differential are moving. And the CV joint over here is rotating. Whoops, truck's falling off. Now, if there were a wheel on there, it would be back driving the shaft here. So that's what that's what it would be doing if it didn't have these. But now in rear wheel drive, I can have it out and have it more efficient. So I'm pretty pleased with that mechanism. So the next function I'm going to show is steering. So for it, I have a Power Functions medium motor tucked under that XL. You can see it right there. So it runs this small linear actuator, and then also this gear here that runs to the steering wheel. So that's the steering wheel going there. It's probably geared too fast, but I guess I didn't worry about that. I could have changed it. I guess it was just more effort than I felt like doing. But anyways, the linear actuator pushes down here, which moves this whole chunk here. And then down here, we've got a link going to that pivot, steering it, and then it also connects onto this link here for the other wheel. So, works like that. And then if it doesn't break, like this. This perspective, it looks like this. So now the rest of my the next 5 remote control functions I'll have to do with the drivetrain. First up, we've got the transfer case. So we've got a Power Functions medium motor right back there. Runs the worm gear that runs this gear, runs this 16 long axle up there. Then it rotates this old light gray piece, which pulls this dark gray beam there with a rubber band. So that causes this here to be flipped, moving that driving ring into 4-wheel drive, connecting this drive shaft. And then at the same time, the axle is driving these 3 12-tooth gears directly, using the old axle to gear meshing that I've thought of a long time ago and never had a good use for till now. But anyways, this axle runs this part here, which shifts between the high and low ranges. So first it pulls this into 4-wheel drive, and it stays in high back here. Then you keep going, it stretches the rubber band up here, but that doesn't do anything, and then it shifts into 4-low. So, we see it here. So first, it pulls that, moving that into 4-wheel drive. Then it's going to rotate those 12-tooth gears and engage the low range. Go back the other way. Try to demonstrate that working. So I got it running, it's in rear wheel drive, high range, then I'll start shifting. First 4-wheel drive engages, the front is moving, and then there's a neutral somewhere in there. And now it's in low range. So low, neutral, 4 high, and then 2 high again. Next we have the clutch. It's run off of this servo motor here. So first it runs this 22 gear back there, which then runs a couple 14-tooth gears you can see right in the middle, which then runs that wave selector. So it just disengages drive. Pretty simple on that part. But the more interesting thing is it runs this 12-tooth gear to this 36-tooth gear, flipping this switch. So what that switch does, you can see I've got a receiver here. So this one actually happens to be a Chinese one that runs on a 2.4 gigahertz instead of IR, which I used first because I could put it under the floor without losing transmission, and second because I didn't want to break an expensive Lego one. Because what I'm doing here, I'm actually turning off the receiver by flipping the switch. So So you can hear that little servo beep because I turn it on now. So that was actually pretty tricky to do because the way the Lego wiring works, there's two wires that are always on for receivers and then two that are more conditional. So the switch actually only turns off the two for motors and leaves the ones for receivers going. So it actually wouldn't have had any effect. So what I did is I ran so from the battery, first I ran a power functions extension wire, then added a 9-volt plate to another power functions extension wire, and then brought it to the switch. So what that did, because of its little time spent in 9-volt territory, that eliminated the two constant power ones, so it would then only run the motors, causing all the power to be switched off when I flipped the switch. So then after that, I think right on the contact here, I put on two little pieces of aluminum foil that basically reinstate the constant power for the receiver. It's a similar trick to how people sometimes will run a power functions receiver off an old 9-volt battery, but just a little one on each side to bring the power over, and then that gives the receiver the power it needs. So I do have to be careful not to flip the switch the other way or anything, but I have it blocked out on my controller. So it actually works pretty well. So the cool thing with that, the whole reason I went to that trouble, is because the two motors for the shifting the manual transmission are on there. So this way, I actually have to push the clutch down before shifting, just like on a real manual. Well, I guess on a real manual, there's not necessarily an override, but you still need to. And the other cool thing with this manual design, on my older designs I always had to just leave it in its position to hold a gear, which kind of depletes the battery on the remote. So with this one, I can push the clutch down, put it into transmission, or put it into gear, release the clutch, then this turns off, so I can move this back into the center, and it'll still stay in the gear. I just have to remember to go back before I unclutch. So the transmission in this truck is essentially the same 5+ reverse design I've used in some previous Fords, Mustang and F-150, which is interesting for having the reverse gear after fifths, which is kind of challenging to do. But anyways, on this older truck I'm modeling, the real truck only had a 4+R, so I've actually locked out fifths just by using an old 16-tooth clutch gear and putting it on backwards. So it's actually a 4+R, but I could make it a 5+R very easily. Though I don't know if it would like the higher gearing or not. But anyways, it's controlled by this joystick here, using two servo motors, and so it'll move the one in the truck. Oh yeah, I have to clutch. So then, and it breaks. I'll fix it and come back. Yeah, the trouble with that is that my light gray shifters are all cracked. So I could put a red one back in and then it wouldn't break, but then it wouldn't look very nice. So I'll see if it holds. Maybe I'll have to switch. Oops. Hard to control this all with one hand. And then if I unclutch, you can see that it'll just stay there, even if I undo this, which is pretty cool. And the other cool thing is that I can pre-select a gear. So say I'm... Dang. Fix that. Okay. So say I'm in first gear up here, and I want to do a fast shift to second. I can go on my controller while it's unclutched, shift back to second, then all I gotta do is tap the clutch and it'll do it automatically as the power comes back on. Okay, apparently I didn't pre-select it right or something. Yeah, there we go. Or going the other way, back. Oops, blowing up the controller down here. That should do it. Then I just tap the clutch, and it executes the shift on its own. So I think that's pretty cool. I really like this type of transmission design. I think it's about as close to a real-life manual transmission experience you can do with Lego, and I quite like it for that. So now I've been through all 4 of my other drivetrain functions, counting the shifting as 2, so all I got left to show is the actual driving. So with 3 different positions in the transfer case, plus 5 different gears, I've got 15 total combinations. I'm not going to show them all, I'll just show some of the different ones that are more interesting. One other thing I'll note is that this truck, it doesn't work well if you reverse the drive motor. Because of the construction of the gearbox, it's kind of asymmetrical. Going forwards, it pushes gears together. Going backwards, it pushes them apart and it'll skip. Which is perfectly okay for me, because I've got a reverse gear on the truck. It just gives me an excuse to use it. So, I'm going to start off with, in the most challenging gear there is, which is going to be 4th gear and 4-wheel drive high range. So this one, yeah, it's going to be the most strain on the motors. And you can see it is struggling, but it's definitely moving. Show the engine. There it is, struggling to drive. Now I'll tap the clutch. You can just see it idling. Unclutch. And yeah, it's kind of fun having a clutch. So now I've got it in the same gear, it's still in 4th, but now I'm in rear-wheel drive high range with the front hubs disconnected, so it'll be a little less strain because it doesn't have to run the front drive shaft, and I'll be able to show you how the front differential isn't spinning at all. So, there it is driving. It's not much easier on the motors, but if you look up here, you can see the differential there is not moving at all, even though the wheels are. It's not being driven by the engine or by the wheels. So I think that's pretty cool. Now I'm going to shift into reverse and show that one off. Still in still in 2-wheel drive high range. But much slower gearing, of course. But the motors seem to be happy with it. And yeah, that's this truck's Achilles heel. The wheels always fall off. I just couldn't get a strong attachment to this turntable here. See, I've got pins with bits of 4mm hose in it, which is the strongest I could think of, but they still fall off. It's annoying. Now I'm going to just try to shift through all the gears while driving in 4-low. So, 1st gear, clutch, and shift, drive in 2nd, clutch, shift, drive in 3rd, clutch, shift, 4th, and clutch, shift, and okay, something didn't shift right. That's not reverse. Yeah, it just keeps blowing up because that's broken there. But you've already seen it in reverse. I'll leave it at that. And here's reverse. Alright. Now I'm going to put it back into 1st gear and just try a little bit of off-roading and then be done with all this drivetrain stuff. So, clutch. Shift. Alright, then drive with my mini ice, maybe? No, that's not gonna work. I'll just drive like this. Let's see if I can make it up my hand here. I think I had a CV joint fail in the front, probably. They're not really very strong, but it is making progress, so maybe I still have front-wheel drive. I don't know. But you can see the rear rims are slipping inside the tire, which is a weakness of these tires. Yeah. I'm going to assume that's as far as it'll get. But I'm just happy that the drivetrain is able to hold up to that. It was never meant to be a good off-roader, so I'm okay with that. The final cool thing with this truck that I'll show you just before I conclude is that the body is like totally removable. So it's just pinned on from the top. Take off the bed there, and one-handed isn't ideal, but I'll get my other hand in there. Just lift them right off. Then you can see the chassis here. Yeah. I guess I'll point out I got the rechargeable battery there. Receivers for the back. Got an on-off switch here. And I actually never really showed you how the shifting works, so I better do that. So I got two servo motors. I think this one right there, it runs a 12-tooth single bevel gear that runs this 16-tooth gear, or sorry, not a 16, a 36, which moves that back and forth. So as long as this is actually in here, should have put the clutch closer to the shifter on the controller. Switches shifts between these, and the other servo is not that one. That one's for the clutch. Oh, here it is. Right here, you can see the end. Runs this linkage. To do the forward and backward. So. So yeah, that's that. Now I'll put the body back on and conclude. Overall, I'm really happy with this truck. It looks good and has a lot of functionality, but even though it has a lot of functionality, it's actually fun to drive. Like, not in a driving fast and off-roading kind of way, but in a, like, rowing through the gears and messing around with all that stuff. I think it was pretty user-friendly that way. Well, yeah, user-friendly, but still complicated. Kind of like a video game, I guess. But, yeah, I think this is the closest I've ever come to simulating a manual transmission in a model, and I think that's pretty fun.